The maiden voyage of the RMS Titanic ended in tragedy at 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, well over 100 years ago, with the disaster of the luxury passenger liner unraveling the true reality of that dreadful evening through the years, with many stories of heroic acts and other compelling details. Hello everyone, Scott here with Quest Capsule, coming to you with 10 stunning facts about the tragedy of the RMS Titanic. Let's begin. Number 10. Early plans to recover Titanic's wreckage. Almost immediately after the tragedy, proposals were made to find and raise the ship by some of the wealthy families involved with the tragedy. They initially contracted a company to lift her from the Atlantic if they could find it, but the project was terminated because divers would not even be able to reach a fraction of the depth they needed to, with the pressure reaching more than 6,000 pounds per square inch. This plan was eventually scrapped due to the lack of submarine technology in that time period and the events of World War I. Later, other recovery plans were suggested that included using electromagnets attached to a submarine with hopes of the magnetic force pulling it towards the Titanic's steel hull to pinpoint its exact location, and then once discovered, sending down even more electromagnets and lifting her out using a fleet of barges and a winch. Another proposal involved nylon balloons attached to the ship's hull and floating the wreckage to the surface once it was located, and then with plans to convert the shipwreck into a floating museum. Other impractical schemes were suggested, one that involved pumping Titanic full of molten wax, and another included filling the wreckage with ping pong balls, amongst other suggestions and ideas through the decades to lift her from her resting spot deep in the Atlantic, all ideas eventually being dismissed. Only recently, in January of 2020, did the United Kingdom and the United States governments finally announce they had agreed to finally protect the wreckage of the RMS Titanic. Number 9. The sinking foretold. The Titanic's looming tragedy might have been foretold in 1898 within a published novel by Morgan Robertson titled Futility. It's the story of the largest ship ever built, called the Titan. The fictional ship Titan sank in April in the North Atlantic, and also similar to the RMS Titanic, it too did not carry enough lifeboats to rescue its doomed passengers. Other mysterious similarities of the fictional Titan was it was 800 feet long, compared to the 882 feet 9-inch length of the RMS Titanic. The book's author was often said to have some sort of clairvoyance or pre-recognition due to all the similarities involved in the novel and the catastrophe, of which he denied. The book was published 14 years before the Titanic sank. Number 8. A movie role days after the tragedy. In 1912, Dorothy Gibson, a survivor of the Titanic and an American film actress in her time, starred in a silent film called Saved from the Titanic, just less than a month after the sinking of the Titanic. The film was completed in less than a week, as the producer was anxious and calculated in regards to finishing the film and releasing it quickly. The short 10-minute silent film starred a shaken and traumatized Gibson, known to have burst into tears on multiple takes during filming, wearing the exact clothes she wore as the lifeboat carried her away from the tragic scene of the sinking Titanic. Number 7. A canceled drill on the day of the disaster. Poor planning was very apparent on the maiden voyage of the Titanic, due to a lack of safety protocol put in place by White Star Line, more specifically a shortage of lifeboats on Titanic, to the tune of a mere 16 boats and 4 collapsibles that in the end only allowed for roughly 710 passengers to escape the sinking, while more than 1,500 lives were lost. Coincidentally, and rather mysteriously, was the fact that the Titanic had a scheduled lifeboat drill in place the morning before the ship sank. Prior to sinking, notifications had been posted detailing which shipmates were assigned to particular lifeboat sections in order to carry out the drills. But most of the crew were not even true seamen and unfamiliar with the complex and complicated procedures of dropping the rowboats, not to mention many of them had no prior rowing experience at all. It appears even if there were enough lifeboats on board Titanic, they may have been unable to launch them and rescue the passengers in time before sinking due to this lack of experience and training. But in the end, Captain Smith ended up canceling the drill on the very same day it sank. Number 6. Titanic's canine survivors. The Titanic was known to have a kennel on board the ship. There were reportedly 12 dogs that sailed along the Atlantic on the luxury liner that evening. Out of the 12, only 3 dogs are known to have survived. Since first-class passengers were known to travel with pets, the vessel had top-of-the-line kennels with attendants who watched over the elite passengers' furry companions. A Pomeranian was known to escape with its owner, Margaret Beckstein Hayes, onto Lifeboat 7. The dog's name was Lady, and she was wrapped up in a blanket and managed to live to see another day. Sen Yat Sen, a Pekingese breed of dog, boarded lifeboat number 3 with its owners. According to a museum curator related to the Titanic, nobody on the lifeboat objected to the presence of the dog. Another Pomeranian found its way off the sinking ship via Lifeboat 6, along with Elizabeth Jane Rothschild, wife of Martin Rothschild, who didn't survive the disaster. Both the dog and Jane survived until the Carpathia arrived to rescue them the following morning. Interesting to point out, the crew of the RMS Carpathia at first wouldn't allow the dog aboard, but eventually gave in, probably because of the frightening events that Miss Rothschild went through. Number 5. The last survivor of the Titanic. Only 9 weeks old when she boarded the Titanic with her brother and parents as third-class passengers, Melvina Dean was too young to have any vivid memories of the historic incident that would forever be ingrained within her family's life story. On that tragic evening, her parents had felt the jolt of the impact with the iceberg, and her father told her mother to immediately dress the children and go up to the Titanic's deck. Luckily, her mother, brother, and herself were able to escape the sinking of the Titanic on Lifeboat 10, but her father remained behind as they called out for women and children first. They survived and arrived safely in New York City on the Carpathia a few days later, and it remained a tragic memory for her throughout her lifetime as she lost her father that night, amongst the many others whose lives were abruptly taken. Melvina Dean, the last survivor of the Titanic, died on May 31st, 2009 at the age of 97. Number 4. Titanic's final lunch menu. An online auction sold the last lunch menu presented on the RMS Titanic on the fateful day of its sinking, selling for more than the maximum price offer at $88,000, well over what the sellers had initially expected. The recovery of the menu is streaked within a potentially selfish act. It was taken from the ship by one of the first-class passengers, Abraham Lincoln Salomon, a New York businessman who had hopped aboard Lifeboat 1 that only rescued 12 passengers. The passengers on this lifeboat were said in some cases to have bribed crew with money to row away from the sinking ship, leaving others stranded and fighting for their lives as they rowed away. Later on, the lifeboat would be nicknamed the Money Boat or the Millionaire's Boat by the press. The last RMS Titanic lunch menu presented on April 14, 1912, offered lunch dishes like fillets of brill, corned beef, vegetables, dumplings, grilled mutton chops, Norwegian anchovies, Virginia ham, corned ox tongue, and a vast lineup of cheese selections, amongst many other options. Interestingly, the back of the menu was signed by a first-class passenger named Isaac Gerald Frauenthal in pencil signature, whom had escaped on another lifeboat. Both Mr. Salomon and Mr. Frauenthal may have had lunch together aboard the vessel earlier in the day before the tragedy. Number 3. The Courage of Molly Brown. Known as one of the most colorful and famous passengers you've surely heard of before, and often referred to as the unsinkable Molly Brown, who attempted to persuade crew to row back to the debris field from the scene of the sinking RMS Titanic to search for additional survivors by grabbing an oar and demanding they go back to help others. When the crew stalled their rescue efforts due to safety concerns, she threatened to throw a crewman overboard. In 1970, her home was saved from demolition, and now over 45,000 visitors a year take guided tours of the home of Molly Brown to see, hear, and learn more about the interesting stories from her life. The home is located in Denver, Colorado. Number 2, honeymooning on the Titanic. There were a known 13 couples honeymooning on the Titanic, including the richest and most famous passenger, the Astors, John Jacob IV and Madeline Astor. Their story is interesting enough with his wealth and the fact that he was 47 years old and she was 18. But aside from the Astors, there were many others who were coupled in their romance aboard the White Star's first, second, and third class sections. Daniel and Mary Marvin traveled to England after their marriage before boarding the Titanic's ill-fated journey home. An interesting discovery was that Daniel's father owned a movie company, with Daniel himself showing strong interest in filmmaking and wanting to eventually become a movie director. He was said to have filmed his and Mary's time aboard the Titanic with a movie camera he brought along. Daniel did not survive the sinking, with their final moment told in newspapers by Mary. She stated, "He knocked down men to get me into the boat. As I was put in the boat, he cried, 'It's all right, little girl. You go ahead. I will stay a while. I'll put on a life preserver and jump off and follow your boat.' As our boat shoved off, he threw a kiss at me, and that is the last I saw of him." If Daniel's movie camera and footage would have survived the calamity, it would have been one of the most priceless findings from the Titanic that would have revealed an insider's view from the actual maiden voyage in pursuit. And number 1, a Titanic love story. The owners of the Macy's department store in New York City share a final, remarkable moment of love that will be firmly planted within the storyline of the RMS Titanic tragedy. With lifeboat number 8 in the foreground, awaiting to be boarded by Ida and Isidore Strauss and their maid, Ellen Bird, the crewmen overseeing the dispatch of passengers onto lifeboats actually allowed the couple to both board the rescue boat due to their elderly age. But Isidore refused to board with so many women and children still remaining on the fast-sinking Titanic. He demanded his wife board the lifeboat and that he would stay behind. Ida refused and would not leave her husband. Those rescued, as well as crewmen already aboard Lifeboat 8, overheard her saying to her husband, "We have lived together for many years. Where you go, I go." Arm in arm they stood on the deck together to meet their fate. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to like, share, comment, and consider subscribing to the Quest Capsule channel. And be on the lookout for more interesting top 10 videos, vlog documentaries, travel reviews, and other video content we put out for our fellowship of subscribers and viewers just like you.